make sure you don't take a taxi or public transport. So am I supposed to walk? How am I still alive? Doesn't really surprise me. I do absolutely nothing. Now is not the time. I know, I'm sorry.
Telling me that you had some breastfeeding problems with your first?
Yeah, with my first, it was difficult. I mean, I think it is for most people, right? Like, I feel like more people have difficulty breastfeeding than don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was hard. It took quite a long time to be able to feed her quite confidently. I used the nipple shield because that seemed to be better for her to latch. In general, my first daughter is quite a fussy child, so it doesn't really surprise me in hindsight that breastfeeding was quite difficult. I think it was kind of a two-way street. We both had to learn how to do it. Mm-hmm. With my second daughter, it was much easier. But I think I felt more confident, and I don't know, my body had done it before, so maybe it also made it easier.
Do you remember the differences between your first birth and your second in terms of placenta and then the post-birth? What are they, like contractions and so on?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that, like, physiologically and however else you would describe it, both births and after periods were very, very similar. I was really fortunate that with both children, even though they were on the larger side.
How many kilos?
My first daughter was 3.8 kilos and my second was 4.2.
Wow.
Yeah, I make fairly large babies. Not the largest, but they're pretty large. I didn't have any injuries or anything. I didn't have any tears.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was super lucky. Maybe, again, it was part of being relaxed. Maybe I was just lucky. Obviously, as I said, I didn't prepare, so...
No massages.
No, I know, I'm sorry. I wish I could...
Explain.
I wish I could help someone.
How easy. Yeah.
My advice would be to do absolutely nothing. And then maybe it won't... But no, I think it was just lucky. So I didn't have any kind of complicated recovery. Of course, it took a lot longer after my first because I think your body has been through a bit more trauma the first time round. The second time round, I gave birth to her and I literally felt fine like 2 days later.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just like, I felt like I'd gone back to normal. I felt more normal than I had when I was pregnant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the first time, when you say it took me a little bit longer to recover, what was it? What made you feel like you had trauma, first trauma?
It was just quite painful.
To sit? Or?
Yeah, to sit. Obviously, there's quite a lot of bleeding afterwards as well that I wasn't really prepared for. I didn't really know that, actually, that you bleed for so long and so much afterwards. I kind of felt like, is everything okay? Because this seems really abnormal. Like, how am I still alive with all of this happening? But apparently it's totally normal, but no one really says that. So the blood part went for quite a long time, but
yeah. All right. And did you think that did you feel any baby blues
with my first? Like right on time. I think maybe like 2 weeks afterwards, but it wasn't like a level that you would be concerned about. It was like this kind of funny, hysterical, like, oh my God, the world is such a terrible place. What am I going to do? Like, how can I protect my baby for, the rest of her life? It was kind of funny baby blues. And then for my second, I think I was much more delayed, and maybe that was not so much baby blues but other stuff, because my pregnancy and my birth and everything afterwards was just so impacted by COVID that I felt down for quite a really long time. Quite a really long time is terrible language. I felt down for quite some time. after the birth of my second, and I think that was because really we had no family support here whatsoever. No one could visit. It was the middle of winter, and you couldn't even leave really the house. Only the supermarkets were open for 7 months or something ridiculous. So I feel like the first 6 months of my daughter's life was just sort of in this hole of like dark winter and not seeing anyone and no one seeing my baby. Like when I think about those first months, really no one apart from a small handful of friends met her, which feels like such a shame, but yeah, it was quite difficult. I would say that was my equivalent of baby blues, and it was much harder than what I experienced with my first daughter.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, so you've given birth before COVID and after at the hospital. Were there any differences?
It was really very different. What happened when I was 39 weeks with my second daughter, and that was when I gave birth actually to my first daughter, we were close contacts of a positive COVID case at my daughter's daycare. Oh. So I was literally like, oh my gosh, I'm ready to give birth any minute, any day. I was expecting it already. And we had to go into quarantine for 2 weeks. And then I started to develop symptoms. So I got a sore throat, a cough, and I had a fever, and so did my daughter. So at that time, it was really, really hard to get a test. And also I think contact tracing in Germany had kind of fallen apart, because although we were direct contacts, we were never followed up until after the quarantine period had actually passed. So then we got a call, and then we got an email, a letter saying that we needed to go into quarantine. Yeah. But obviously the daycare had contacted us prior to that and said you need to go into quarantine for 2 weeks. But I was ready to give birth, so I was like, what do? I have symptoms. I couldn't get a test anywhere because the contact tracing hadn't confirmed that we were contacts yet. So I was really lucky that through work I knew a doctor who was able to do a test for me, and it did come back negative, but I still had these symptoms. Yeah. So I was very nervous that I was going to become positive. So I had contacted the hospital that I was due to give birth at, and they said, well, you can't come here if you're positive.
What?
Yeah. And they said, but if you have a negative test, then you can come. So,
but wait, if you had positive test, where should have you gone to give birth?
Yeah, well, there was one hospital in Berlin that would take you if you had, if you were COVID positive. Charité.
Okay, that's the only place you can go to if you have. Probably they have like a facility.
A facility, like an isolation ward for women to give birth who also have COVID. And so I rang them and I said, okay, I'm a direct contact of a COVID positive person. I'm due to give birth any day and I have symptoms. So what do I do if I go into labour? I've been told I need to come to you. And they said, well, you can call us when you go into labour, but we might not have space for you.
Oh my God.
And I said, okay, so where do I go then? Where do I go if you can't take me? And they said, well, you might have to call this other hospital and then maybe they can take you. And I was thinking, okay, well, my first labour was relatively short. I mean, it was 15 hours. This one could be much shorter. So I was kind of freaked out about the fact that, okay, I would have to call them when I'm already in labour. I don't even know if I can go there to give birth or not. And to make matters worse, they also said, because my husband was also in quarantine, that he wouldn't be able to come either, so I would have to be on my own. And also that they wanted to kindly add on the phone that make sure you don't take a taxi or public transport. And I was like, okay, so am I supposed to walk? Like, I mean, yeah, my husband could drive me, but he's not supposed to be at the hospital either. We have a nearly 2-year-old child. I mean, it was extremely stressful. So close to giving birth, to have everything so up in the air. All I could see that was that I was going to have to give birth in this isolation room with everyone in full PPE, and I was worried about what that would mean for my baby if I was COVID positive. And interestingly, before that time, before we received the call that we were contacts, I had had some very gentle contractions, and I thought, okay, it's coming really soon. And when we got that news, everything stopped. I had no more contractions, and I really felt that I was not going to give birth anytime soon. I was under so much stress, like really the most intense stress I think I've felt in a very, very long time. And probably it was exacerbated by hormones too. That I wonder sometimes whether that impacted the birth from progressing, because maybe my body was like, now is not the time, like don't come now, because everything really stopped overnight and I felt it, that nothing was going to happen. And so ironically, I think the day that we were due to come out of our quarantine, I went into labor. So it was like 41
Incredible.
weeks and one day that I went into labor.
And you had a negative test?
Yeah.
And then you could go to that.
Yeah, well, again, we couldn't get tested because they,
Yes.
you know, you couldn't get.
At that time, it was a mess.
It was a real mess. It was so hard to get a test. But we went to the hospital because we weren't in quarantine officially, and they tested us once we got there, and we were fine. So I think it was really a bad coincidence that we managed to have some sort of illness that mimicked COVID at the same time as being contacts. And I was fortunately able to go and give birth to my daughter in the hospital that I'd originally planned with my husband there. So that was a relief. But even at the hospital, it was just weird. Like, I had to wear my mask for the majority of the labor. And it was just when I really got into the active labor part, the midwives were nice and said, look, you can take off your mask. It's going to be much easier for you to get more air in if you take off your mask. But I think officially the policy was that you really actually had to wear the mask the whole time.
You were supposed to give birth in the mask.
Yeah. And I have to admit that I didn't really notice the mask for most of it because we were sort of used to masks by that point, and they weren't the ones that we wear now. We could wear those cloth ones at the time, and those are like, those are much easier to breathe through than what we have to wear now. The FFP2 are like, I can't imagine having to do that with those. And so that was kind of a weird part of being in labour with a mask on. Not so good for your breathing. But then afterwards, I think that was the worst part, to be impacted by COVID, because I had to stay in the hospital. I didn't want to. I had to stay in the hospital at night so that they could just test my daughter's sugar levels because she was quite big. And Simon couldn't visit apart from 1 hour a day, which was really sad because you want your partner to be there to be with the baby as well. So, I mean, for me, it was my second birth experience. So I think the COVID aspect wasn't as terrifying because I kind of knew birth already. But I imagine that if that was your first experience and you couldn't have your birth partner with you afterwards, or maybe for the majority of your labour, they're only actually supposed to be there for the active time of your labour, then that would be really hard if it was your first time. So,
but your partner was allowed to the birth itself, or not?
Yeah,
okay.
Because I was further along and it was happening quicker with a second birth. But I think if it's your first and you're not progressed enough, then your partner can't be with you until you're actually closer to giving birth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So, what advice do you have for our future mothers? I think to really
trust your body, that your body knows how to give birth. Women have been doing it for however long, thousands of years, and not to fight it, because I think that we have this idea of pushing, and that actually goes against what our body is trying to do, which is to get the baby out.
What is pushing?
To push the baby out.
Yeah.
But if you try to actively push a baby out, then it kind of stops it from coming out.
Oh, right.
You kind of need to do the opposite and just let it. No, not for my second. I just let it happen.
Yeah.
And it was much less traumatic, I would say.
Yeah.
So I think to trust that your body knows what it's doing, and I think to have a good support person with you who you feel really comfortable with. Is also a really, really important thing. And to be in an environment where you're comfortable. For me, my comfortable environment was being in the hospital and having health professionals around me. That's what made me feel most relaxed. I think if women can get into a position where they feel relaxed and they feel comfortable, then hopefully the experience will go as smoothly as it can.
Mm-hmm.
And being open to the fact that it may not go the way that you want.
Mm-hmm.
And just being mentally prepared for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.